Have you ever witnessed a moment that changed everything?
A millionaire took his mute daughter to a cafe and froze when a black waitress used sign language to communicate with her.
What happened next changed everyone's lives forever.
You can't be serious, Victoria Ashford snorted, pushing her coffee cup so hard that the liquid spilled onto the marble table. That disabled waitress is making strange gestures at my daughter like she's some kind of circus act.
Café Belle Vista, located in the financial heart of Manhattan, was known for catering exclusively to the city's elite.
On that Tuesday afternoon, the tension in the air was almost palpable as all eyes turned to the central table.
Can you imagine the shock that followed?
Kesha Johnson, 26, stood motionless for a moment, her hands still suspended in the air after communicating in sign language with Victoria's 8-year-old daughter, Emma. The girl hadn't spoken since an accident she had witnessed 2 years earlier. And for the first time in months, she had smiled genuinely. "Ma'am, Kesha began to explain, but was immediately interrupted. "I don't care about your excuses," Victoria growled, standing up abruptly.
"Where is the manager?
I want this person removed immediately."
"How dare you hire someone like this to serve decent people?" Thomas Ashford, sitting next to his wife, sighed heavily. The 43-year-old man, CEO of one of the largest investment firms in the country, watched the scene with a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. His daughter Emma, who had spent the last 2 years in total silence, now looked at Kesha with bright eyes, trying to timidly imitate the sign she had just learned. "Victoria, maybe we should," Thomas tried to intervene, but he knew his wife's explosive temper all too well. "Don't give me that condescension, Thomas," Victoria turned to him with flaming eyes. "Our daughter needs proper therapy, not clowning around with a waitress who can barely speak properly." Kesha kept her head up, her fingers discreetly clenching the small digital recorder hidden in her apron pocket. During her 5 years working at that establishment, she had witnessed and documented countless similar situations. What those people didn't know was that behind that simple deaf waitress was a brilliant mind and a plan that was being carefully constructed. "Mom, she's nice," Emma whispered for the first time in 2 years, her voice hoarse from so much silence. The entire cafe was in shock. Thomas dropped the napkin he was holding.
Victoria froze completely, but Kesha just smiled calmly as if she had just witnessed the first move of a chess game she had planned several moves ahead. Her eyes briefly met Emma's, and a silent understanding passed between them. At that moment, watching Victoria's reaction of despair disguised as anger, Kesha knew she had just found the final piece of the puzzle she had been putting together for years. If this story of prejudice and transformation hasn't gripped you yet, wait until you see what happens next. The silence that followed Emma's first words in 2 years lasted only a few seconds before Victoria exploded in an even more intense rage. "This is unacceptable," she shouted, slamming her palm on the table so hard that the porcelain cups clattered. This person is manipulating my daughter with cheap tricks. Thomas, are you just going to stand there while our daughter is influenced by someone like that?" The other customers at Café Belle Vista watched the scene with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Some whispered among themselves, others filmed discreetly with their cell phones. The establishment, frequented by Manhattan's elite, rarely witnessed such a loss of public composure. Kesha remained calm, her eyes alternating between Victoria and Emma, who was now hiding behind her father's chair. During her 5 years there, she had witnessed countless displays of arrogance and prejudice, but never anything as virulent as this. Mrs. Ashford, Michael, the cafe manager, tried, approaching the table with cautious steps. "Perhaps we can resolve this more discreetly." Discreetly, Victoria turned on him like a snake, ready to strike. "You want me to be discreet when a disabled employee is experimenting on my daughter? Where is the owner? I want this person fired immediately." Thomas watched everything with an expression of deep embarrassment. As the CEO of a company that preached diversity and inclusion in its annual reports, he knew exactly how damaging this scene could be to his reputation if it leaked to the media. But he also knew Victoria's explosive temper when she was upset. "My wife is concerned about our daughter," he muttered, trying to defuse the situation. Kesha maintained her professional demeanor, but her fingers tapped the recorder in her pocket again. This wasn't just another episode of casual discrimination. It was a public display of how these people really thought when they felt superior and untouchable. What Victoria didn't know was that Kesha had grown up in an environment where every word had to be measured, every gesture calculated for survival. The daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to support them, she had learned early on that the world would not be kind to a deaf black girl from Brooklyn. During her teenage years, when other kids were having fun, Kesha was at the public library studying advanced lip reading and sign language. By 16, she had mastered 4 different sign languages and had developed an almost supernatural ability to read facial expressions and body language. "Kesha," Michael said nervously.
"Maybe you should."
"No," Emma whispered again, louder this time, stepping out from behind her father's chair.
"She didn't do anything wrong. She just helped me."
Victoria froze.
Thomas's eyes widened.
This was the second time Emma had spoken in 2 years, and this time she was defending someone. "Emma, sweetheart," Victoria tried to soften her voice, crouching down next to her daughter.
"Mommy's just worried about you. These people, they don't understand how to take care of special children like you."
Kesha watched the interaction with clinical interest. Victoria was trying to manipulate her own daughter, using her condition as justification for prejudice. It was a pattern she had seen dozens of times before.
Privileged people justifying their discrimination as protection or concern. "I'm not special," Emma replied, surprising everyone again. "I just didn't want to speak because people yell a lot." The irony of the statement did not go unnoticed by anyone present. Victoria had spent the last few minutes yelling in a crowded cafe. Exactly the kind of behavior that had traumatized Emma in the first place. Thomas finally stood up, placing a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder.
"Victoria, maybe we should talk about this at home." "No," Victoria rose like a tower of indignation. "I'm not leaving here until this situation is properly resolved."
"I want to speak to the owner now."
Kesha finally spoke, her voice clear and controlled. "Mr. Richardson will be here at 3 o'clock.
"I can schedule a meeting if you'd like."
The ease with which Kesha spoke, articulating every word perfectly despite her deafness, seemed to irritate Victoria even more. It was as if the young woman's competence was a personal affront to her preconceptions.
"Do you have some kind of certification to deal with children?"
Victoria fired back.
"Any medical training? Who gave you permission to approach my daughter?"
"Mommy, stop," Emma pleaded, her fragile little voice carrying surprising authority.
"You're being mean." The entire cafe was now completely silent.
Even the baristas had stopped preparing drinks to watch the drama unfold.
Cell phone cameras captured every moment, and Kesha knew it would go viral in a matter of hours. But there was something Victoria didn't realize.
Every poisonous word, every display of prejudice was being carefully documented.
And Kesha wasn't just collecting evidence from that moment.
She was building a much bigger case. During her years at Café Belle Vista, she had witnessed and discreetly recorded dozens of conversations where Manhattan's elite revealed their true opinions about diversity, equality, and social justice. Conversations where they openly discussed how to keep certain people out of certain social circles. What those privileged people didn't know was that every racist comment disguised as a joke, every display of prejudice masked as concern was being carefully catalogued by someone they considered invisible and harmless. Kesha looked at Emma, who was now timidly holding her father's hand, and saw in her not just a traumatized child, but a potential ally in something much bigger than anyone there could imagine. "You can rest assured," Kesha said calmly, adjusting her apron as she prepared to return to work.
"Everything will be handled appropriately." Victoria interpreted this as surrender. Thomas sighed in relief, thinking the embarrassment was over.
Emma looked at Kesha with eyes that sparkled in a way that suggested she understood something the adults didn't.
Each new humiliation only strengthened something inside Kesha that her oppressors couldn't see.
A quiet determination fueled by the very injustice they sought to impose, as she meticulously documented every piece of evidence she would need to reveal the true faces behind those masks of respectability.
In the 2 weeks following the incident at Café Belle Vista, the routine seemed to return to normal.
Victoria returned to her usual table on Tuesdays and Thursdays as if nothing had happened. Thomas continued his business meetings there, and Emma had changed completely. The girl now arrived at the cafe with a small notebook where she practiced signs she had learned from Kesha. She smiled openly, asked questions, and for the first time in 2 years, she seemed genuinely happy. Her transformation was so evident that other customers began to comment on the miraculous recovery of the Ashford daughter. Kesha watched it all with clinical interest as she waited tables and cleaned counters. During her breaks, she didn't rest like the other employees. Instead, she went down to the basement of the cafe where she had transformed a small abandoned storage room into something none of her colleagues suspected existed.
Meticulously organized files covered an entire wall.
Each folder contained recordings, photographs, transcripts of conversations, and documents she had collected over 5 years, not just from Café Bella Vista, but from charity events, city council meetings, and social gatherings of Manhattan's elite, where she had worked as a temporary waitress.
Project Awakening was written in small letters on a central folder.
Inside were detailed profiles of 43 influential people, including Victoria and Thomas Ashford. Each profile documented patterns of discrimination, prejudiced comments, and evidence of exclusionary practices disguised as company policy or legitimate concerns. Victoria had no idea that her phone conversation the previous week, in which she had instructed Emma's private school head to keep an eye on the inappropriate influences her daughter might be receiving, had been recorded by Kesha, who had learned to lip read so well that she could hear phone conversations by watching only one side of the call. "We need to make sure Emma understands the difference between temporary charity and relationships appropriate for her social class," Victoria had said, unaware that every word was being documented. It was during one of these documentation sessions that Kesha received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Marcus Williams, a civil rights attorney, descended the stairs of the storage room with cautious steps. "Impressive," he said, examining the wall of evidence.
"In my 20-year career, I've never seen such systematic documentation of institutional discrimination."
Dr. Williams was no stranger to Kesha. They had met 3 years earlier when she had testified against a restaurant that discriminated against deaf customers. At the time, he had been impressed not only by her courage, but by her ability to meticulously document every aspect of the discrimination she had experienced. "The Ashford case could be our golden opportunity," he continued, leafing through the latest evidence. Victoria made the mistake of verbalizing her discriminatory views in a public space in front of witnesses and with her own daughter present.
That completely changes the legal dynamic. Kesha showed him the detailed plan she had developed. It wasn't just about exposing the Ashford family's individual discrimination.
It was something much bigger, a lawsuit that would set precedents for combating discrimination based on ability and race at elite institutions.
Disability rights legislation has huge loopholes when it comes to subtle discrimination, Dr. Williams explained.
But if we can prove a systematic pattern of exclusionary behavior, we can not only win substantial damages, but force structural changes in how these spaces operate. The plan was bold. Using Emma as an example of a child who had benefited from inclusion and adapted communication, they could demonstrate how Victoria's resistance to sign language was based on prejudice, not genuine maternal protection.
"Emma is our key piece," Kesha said, showing discrete videos she had recorded of the girls' interactions at the cafe. "She blossomed when exposed to diversity."
Victoria tried to deprive her own daughter of communication tools based on her personal prejudices. But there was more. During her research on the Ashford family, Kesha had discovered that, truncated 1369 characters, realizing that they had much more than legal evidence. They had a child whose very recovery of communication completely refuted her mother's discriminatory arguments. That night, after Emma went upstairs with her parents, Kesha finalized the last details of her strategy. She had spent 5 years gathering evidence, 3 years planning the legal approach, and 2 weeks refining the perfect timing. Victoria would return the following Thursday for the monthly meeting of the charity committee she served on, a meeting that always took place in the private room of Café Bella Vista. It was there, surrounded by her social equals, that Kesha would execute the first phase of her plan. What Victoria didn't know was that this particular charity committee had recently received a proposal for a partnership with a disability rights organization, a proposal that would be presented by someone Victoria had already tried to publicly humiliate. Kesha looked at herself in the mirror of the small bathroom in the storeroom, adjusting the blazer she had bought especially for the occasion. Over the past 2 weeks, Victoria had behaved as if she had won a battle to keep her daughter away from inappropriate influences. She had no idea that she had just provided ammunition for a war that was lost before it even began. Upstairs, the cafe was closing, but preparations for the next day were already underway. Kesha climbed the stairs slowly, tucking her documents away carefully, knowing she was carrying social dynamite. On the table where Victoria usually sat, Emma had left her signed notebook. Kesha flipped through it quickly and found a sentence the girl had written in shaky letters.
Kesha is my friend and mommy is wrong.
For a moment, seeing those innocent but powerful words, Kesha felt the weight of the responsibility she carried. It wasn't just about her own justice, but about creating a world where children like Emma could grow up without learning prejudice as their mother tongue. It was when everyone laughed that something unexpected began to take shape. Not just in the atmosphere of that sophisticated cafe, but mainly in the determined look that now shone with an intensity that made some of those present realize that something extraordinary was about to happen. Something that would completely redefine the rules of the game they thought they were winning.
Thursday arrived like any other day at Café Belle Vista.
But for Kesha, it was the day when 5 years of meticulous documentation would finally find its purpose.
The private room on the second floor was being prepared for the monthly meeting of the Manhattan Elite Charity Committee chaired by Victoria Ashford. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the ladies of high society began to arrive.
Victoria entered beaming, greeting her friends with air kisses and comments about the important decision they would be making regarding funding for truly deserving causes. She hadn't noticed that among the special guests was a presentation on inclusion and accessibility in commercial establishments. Before we begin, Victoria announced, adjusting her designer glasses. I would like to share a personal experience about why we should be selective with our donations. Recently, a disabled employee at this very cafe attempted to manipulate my daughter with questionable methods. The other women murmured sympathetically, nodding their heads in solidarity. It was at that moment that Dr. Williams entered the room, followed by Kesha, who was no longer wearing her waitress apron, but a sleek professional blazer. Allow me to introduce our special guest, Dr. Williams said calmly. Kesha Johnson, founder of the Awakening Project and expert on institutional discrimination documentation, Black Voices.
Victoria froze. Her friends looked confused between Victoria and Kesha.
The silence in the room was deafening.
Thank you for inviting me, Kesha said, connecting her laptop to the projector. I'd like to share some interesting data on patterns of discrimination in establishments frequented by Manhattan's elite.
The first image projected showed Victoria screaming in the cafe 2 weeks earlier with a caption, "Discriminatory behavior documented on video."
The audio began to play crystal clear and devastating.
That person is manipulating my daughter with cheap tricks.
How dare you hire someone like that to serve decent people?
Victoria tried to stand up, but her legs seemed to have lost their strength.
That was taken out of context.
Interesting context, Kesha replied.
Moving on to the next slide.
Here we have the phone recording from last Tuesday where you instructed Emma's school principal to watch out for inappropriate influences.
Victoria's voice echoed through the room.
We need to make sure Emma understands the difference between temporary charity and relationships appropriate for her social class. The expressions of the other women changed dramatically. Some began whispering among themselves, clearly uncomfortable. Margaret Thornton, one of the committee's founders, frowned deeply. And here, Kesha continued, we have evidence that Mr. Thomas Ashford, advisor to the Hope Children's Foundation, which receives $2 million in annual federal funding for inclusion programs, was present during these discriminatory incidents and took no corrective action.
Victoria finally found her voice. You can't. That's illegal. You weren't allowed to record. Actually, Dr. Williams stood up.
All of these recordings were made in public or semi-public spaces where there is no expectation of privacy. Furthermore, we have a very special witness here. The door to the hall opened and Emma entered timidly, followed by Thomas, who looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Emma would like to give a presentation in sign language, said Dr. Williams with simultaneous translation.
The 8-year-old girl walked to the front of the room and began to sign.
Her small but clear voice accompanied her gestures.
My name is Emma. I didn't speak because people yelled at me. Kesha taught me that I can talk with my hands when words are difficult. My mother said that people like Kesha shouldn't work here. That's not true. Victoria was visibly devastated. Emma, honey, you don't understand.
I understand that you were wrong, Mom, Emma continued, her signs now more confident.
Kesha helped me when no one else could. She is my teacher and my friend. Margaret Thornton rose slowly.
Victoria, I think you should step down as chair of this committee.
Immediately. Margaret, you can't, Victoria tried to protest but was cut off.
I can and I will, Margaret replied firmly.
This committee represents values of charity and inclusion. Your behavior goes against everything we stand for.
Dr. Williams then presented the final document. We have here a petition signed by 43 members of the community requesting a federal investigation into discriminatory practices at establishments that receive tax benefits for claiming to promote diversity. Victoria looked around the room, seeing faces that had once admired her, now watching her with disapproval and embarrassment. Her reputation, carefully built over decades, was crumbling before her eyes. In addition, Dr. Williams continued, Café Bella Vista will implement a sensitivity training program and hire a full-time sign language interpreter.
Ms. Johnson will personally oversee this transition. Thomas finally spoke, his voice breaking. Victoria, we need to talk at home now. As the Ashford family left the hall in humiliating silence, Kesha remained calm and professional.
She had not acted out of cruelty, but out of justice. Every word documented, every piece of evidence presented had been gathered not to destroy people, but to protect other future victims of discrimination.
Margaret Thornton approached Kesha after the Ashfords left.
I would like to invite you to be our new inclusion consultant with a salary that properly reflects your experience and importance. Emma ran to Kesha and hugged her tightly, signaling, thank you repeatedly. At that moment, watching the girl smile fearlessly and seeing the other women on the committee applauding respectfully, Kesha knew that she had not only won a battle, but planted seeds for much greater changes that were just beginning to blossom.
6 months later, the transformation at Café Bella Vista was complete and impressive.
The establishment had become a national benchmark for inclusion, attracting not only the traditional elite, but a diverse clientele that valued authenticity and respect above social status. Kesha now held the position of Director of Inclusion and Diversity with a salary that surpassed that of many of the customers who had once treated her as invisible. The sign language program implemented at the cafe became so popular that there was a waiting list to participate. Emma, now 9, was not only fluent in sign language, but also helped teach other children on weekends. Her infectious joy and natural ability to communicate made her a little ambassador for inclusion.
Kesha changed our lives completely, Thomas confided during an interview for a television program about stories of overcoming adversity.
Not only did my daughter start talking again, she found her true voice advocating for others who face communication barriers.
Thomas himself had become a vocal advocate for the rights of people with disabilities.
His foundation now allocated 60% of its resources to real inclusion programs, not just projects that looked good on paper.
He had learned the difference between performative charity and genuine justice.
Victoria, on the other hand, faced a completely different reality. After being removed from all the boards and committees she had chaired, she tried to reinvent herself by moving to another city. But in an age of social media and instant information, her reputation followed her like a persistent shadow. Attempts to join new social groups were inevitably thwarted when someone discovered her history. It's amazing how the world has changed, she murmured to an old friend during a rare coffee date at a local establishment.
Far from the elite circle she once frequented, people used to understand that certain social positions came with responsibilities to uphold standards.
Her old friend just shook her head. Victoria, you publicly humiliated a person because of his disability, and you did it in front of your own daughter.
There is no context that justifies that.
Emma thrived at her new school, where inclusion programs had become part of the regular curriculum. She often invited deaf classmates to visit the cafe, creating a natural bridge between communities that had previously lived apart. Her teacher regularly commented on her natural leadership and exceptional empathy.
Emma has a unique ability to make everyone feel included, the school principal said during a meeting with Thomas.
She doesn't see differences as obstacles, but as opportunities to learn something new. Margaret Thornton, who had taken over as chair of the charity committee, implemented strict inclusion policies across all her organizations. The Ashford case taught us that true charity begins with examining our own biases, she regularly explained in lectures on social responsibility. Kesha was invited to speak at universities and corporate conferences about subtle discrimination and documenting injustice, Black Voices. Her story inspired hundreds of people to confront bias in their own workplaces and social circles.
The sweetest revenge is not to destroy those who have hurt you, she said during a lecture at Columbia University. It is to build something so beautiful and powerful that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. Dr. Williams expanded his practice and now specialized exclusively in cases of systematically documented discrimination. The evidence-gathering method Kesha developed became the legal standard for similar cases across the country. One Sunday afternoon, Emma was at the Café practicing sign language with a group of children when she approached Kesha with a serious question. "Kesha, can my mom still learn to be better?"
she asked, her eyes wide with hope and surprising wisdom for her age. Kesha knelt down beside her, considering her answer carefully.
"People can change when they really want to, Emma. But real change comes from within, not from outside."
At that moment, watching Emma sign "I love you" to each child in the group before they left, Kesha realized that she had planted seeds much bigger than a simple legal victory. She had helped raise a generation that would grow up valuing differences instead of fearing them. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting a golden light through the windows of Café Belle Vista, diverse families shared tables where once only the elite felt welcome. Conversations flowed in multiple languages, including sign language, creating a visual symphony of human communication.
Victoria tried to destroy Kesha based on prejudices about disability and social class.
But she ended up destroying only her own credibility.
Kesha learned that true revenge is not getting even for the harm you've suffered.
It's achieving success in creating positive change that your enemies could never imagine. The most powerful lesson didn't come from Victoria's downfall, but from the rise of an entire community that discovered that genuine inclusion doesn't diminish anyone, it elevates everyone.
Have you ever witnessed transformations like this? Have you seen how a determined person can change not only their own life, but an entire community?
Leave your experience in the comments and subscribe to Black Voices for more stories that prove that justice and kindness always win when combined with intelligence and perseverance.